Hello everyone, welcome back to Science of the Soul. In this episode, I'd like to share a wonderful experience I had a few weeks ago with the radio show Only Human on 4ZZZ. I was invited and interviewed by Dr. Kim Stewart and Belle, and we talked about my PhD research in bereavement, trauma counseling for people with a refugee background, and culturally and spiritually aware psychotherapy. I feel very privileged to have had this experience with such warm and seasoned hosts, and it's definitely different being the interviewee for a change. So if you're keen to know a little bit about my background and some of my professional passions, and you have about 30 minutes or so to spare, I humbly invite you to tune in.
You're listening to Only Human with Belle, Kim and Nathan, and we're here with our guest today, Amira Shah. She's a counsellor, researcher and podcaster. So we're going to be talking a little bit about her work and her research. So Amira, could you tell us about your research topic, a little about you also?
All right, thank you, Bella, for the introduction.
No worries.
So my research is on bereavement and Islam in Southeast Queensland, and I started looking into this because I realized that bereavement can evoke a bit of an existential crisis, and if you are brought up in a particularly religious environment, there will be some spiritual questioning if the death experienced is traumatic or goes against your worldview or your assumptive worldview. So on the other hand, sometimes bereavement or existential crises like bereavement, when they occur, it can also reinforce someone's spirituality and religiosity. And I wanted to see what that's like here in Australia, predominantly Southeast Queensland, because I'm at the University of Queensland. So I've decided to locate it here. But the reason why I wanted to look at Muslims in Australia is because of the diversity of Muslims here. You know, they come from all over the world. Some come in as migrants, skilled migrants. Some have been here forever during the Afghan and Cameliers time, so like 100 years. Some come in as refugees, and just so diverse. So I wanted to see how the diverse tapestry of the Islamic culture and the religion influences someone's bereavement, because some of them are also converts, and you just want to see how that is being negotiated in a transcultural environment like Australia. So I was interested in that.
Yeah. Could you tell us how you went about your research as well?
It's a qualitative research. So I spoke with 20 bereaved Muslims in Southeast Queensland, people who have lost somebody in the last 10 years, someone significant. And often what I found out was that I get stories of other losses, not particularly like the one that they started talking about, but other losses, losses of relationships, losses of health, where, you know, some people might have a diagnosis, a terminal or life-threatening diagnosis that changes their lives. Pets, things like that, having to give up animals. So lots of different losses start coming into the picture. So I spoke to 20, and then in the second stage of my study, I wanted to look at the social support that's available in Southeast Queensland when it comes to supporting the grieving Muslim population, because the Muslim population in Queensland alone is quite significant. It's over 600,000. That was the last stats, but it's gone up. And I wanted to see first if the Muslim population knew about counseling or psychological support that can help them with grief and other things, and whether they would go to a psychologist or a religious leader like an imam. And then so I spoke to the imams and the secular support services like social workers, psychologists, and counselors, just to see what their take on was on when it came to supporting Muslims in a psychotherapy or counseling field or area, to see if they felt adequate doing that, if they were comfortable to explore spiritual questions, if they had, I guess, spiritual awareness and cultural awareness, they felt comfortable, confident to work with Muslims, or even just tap into it, and whether or not the religious leaders felt confident and comfortable to offer counseling services, or just support them in their mental health. And so I've had some really surprising and interesting insights, and I'm currently doing the write-up.
And how's that going? Are you...
Let's not talk about that.
Okay, fair enough.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are there any particular grieving cultural practices in Islam? Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, they seem pretty standard across the board, according to my research and my own understanding. Muslims generally try to bury the deceased as soon as they can, get it in the ground, so within the day, and then that's usually followed by, before that there's a washing and shrouding. That's quite similar to other Abrahamic religions in the past as well. And that's quite specific. I actually did a course on that, on how to wash and shroud the a deceased person, and that was an interesting experience, coming from a very sensitive, humanistic approach, and also a spiritual approach. So that was really cool, just to understand what the process is like firsthand, and then the burial, and that was followed by a lot of prayers and gatherings. It's communal grieving in that sense, and I believe there are a lot of reasons behind why communal grieving is generally the way to go historically, and probably up till today.
Could I ask you, just to backtrack a little bit, you were talking about different forms of grieving, and I think that's really interesting because I guess the first thing maybe we come to think of grief is with death, but also I'm interested a little bit about the other forms, and maybe the impact is perhaps underestimated of losing a relationship like a marriage or a significant partnership, and friendships and pets as well. Could you elaborate a little bit about maybe the comparison between what's understood, or what's maybe validated more, I guess?
So I'll start with that. What's validated more is probably grievances that are visible. So, if you fall sick, or you lose your ability to walk, for example, and loved ones pass away, obviously immediate family members are considered more important, and then you've got like the grandparents and aunties and uncles, although this is a very Western concept, because in a lot of Eastern or other cultures, really African cultures, like grandparents, aunties and uncles are pretty much like brothers and sisters, like, oh, this is like my mom and my grandparent looked after me, that sort of thing. So there's that. So what is recognized, I guess, in a Western society is different than what would be recognized in an Asian society, for example, or an African society, or a Middle Eastern society. And so those would be the most validated, I think, in today's modern world. And then you've got your other losses, like divorces. So divorce tends to show up, socially. It will enter your workplace if you're going through a divorce. Like, people tend to know about it, and they do give you allowances and things like that. But then when it comes to things like pets, breakups, and maybe other less visible losses, financial losses, for example, if you made a bad investment, and then you lose like $100,000, and you don't really go around talking about that, but it sits on you, and it has a different effect. So I guess grief is really complex as well. And then you also have the invisible or less visible grief of a miscarriage, for example, or an unborn child. And then that's probably more visible or more apparent for the female. But what about the male? What about the father? What about the partner who is also going through that loss? We often don't see that, and nobody really talks about it. So and also it's all relative. Like maybe someone in their 50s or 60s might have had so many losses in their lives. They know how to cope. They know what it's like, the trajectory of it. And you have a 13-year-old girl who didn't have very strong attachments or relationships, familiar relationships, but she has this pet chicken, and then one day the pet chicken needs to be slaughtered and she has to eat it because they're so poor. This is my mom's story, by the way. And she wouldn't eat it, but her dad would beat her until she would eat it because she hadn't eaten for days. So that's traumatic grief in itself. So it's relative, I believe.
We talk on this show about disability issues a lot, and you mentioned earlier about diagnosis, with, for example, maybe chronic illness and things like that. Did you come across examples of that within your research?
Yes. Yes, I did. I think I came across something that comes to mind right now was relatively recent diagnosis of MS, and how that was linked with the loss of a grandparent.
Could I ask you also, you mentioned a little earlier about the differences between secular and religious sort of support systems. Did you manage to evaluate the sort of whether it was adequate support given by secular organisations or individuals to a person who's more religious?
Yeah, so I mean that's the part of why I'm doing the research. I'm trying to figure out what the climate is like in terms of social support, but we also have to wonder or look at it as from a different perspective as to whether or not the Muslim community, what their perceptions are of getting secular support. If they think that I'm not going to talk about my mental health, there's nothing wrong with me, my religion will give me my faith and everything that I need, and if I seek for help outside, that means that I'm not strong in my faith. There is that belief amongst some people. And then there's the other perception where psychologists and Western psychologists are not going to understand. I can't talk to them about these things. Some of the participants I interviewed, what I've learned was that they wanted to keep it separate. They were just like, psychologists are psychologists and religion is religion. We don't mix it, because I remember one person said, I feel that if I brought religion into the counseling room or with the psychologist, then, and if the psychologist said something about my religion, I feel that will hurt me. So I'd rather not bring that together. And so it really does depend on, to an extent, what the awareness and the knowledge and the understanding of the Muslim population when it comes to seeking mental health support from secular services. And then on the other hand, also, what do they think, how do they perceive religious support? Do they think that if I go to speak to an imam, the imam's just going to tell me the same thing that everybody tells me, like, be patient, have faith, you'll be reunited, and reiterate and reinforce? Or are they able to listen to me? Are they able to discuss and go into deeper spiritual questioning, and all these sort of things? Will they have the capacity for that? So there's a lot of vagueness so far. My data is quite raw. I have to look into it again. I haven't analyzed that part yet, but so far it seems as though there is lack of awareness, and the lack of awareness of support for the Muslim population, and they don't know that mental health and spirituality can go together.
I was just about to ask you that. Did you find any crossover between with the counsellors who had beliefs as well that might have been more supportive?
Yeah, I have. I found spoke to a couple of social workers and support coordinators who are of Muslim background, are Australian, second generation. So, purely transcultural in that sense. And they have a really deep understanding of the marriage between mental health and spirituality, which is awesome. And insanely enough, the imams that I spoke with here in Queensland, 3 out of 5 of them, maybe 4, a good number, are trained in counselling.
Really?
Or have a really deep understanding of how to approach such cases. And
that's so helpful.
It's really great. And like a couple of them have PhDs as well. So I was just like, but they take it upon themselves to do a diploma in counselling and things like that. It's not mandatory or required by the Islamic Imams Association. I don't know what it's called.
So did any of your participants have that experience of working with a counsellor who also had the same beliefs as them?
No.
Oh.
No.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Within the experience of, like, alternatively, people who are going to somebody who is not from the same background as them, would you say that the experience could be really damaging if somebody were to make an assumption about their religion, or sort of the differences within, cultural backgrounds as well being prevalent within professionals?
Are you trying to say that counselling is very white?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Look, honestly, based on my personal experience being a practitioner in Australia for a number of years, I don't get that sense. Maybe because I end up, interacting with a lot of people from various backgrounds, and my white Australian colleagues and friends are really well informed. So personally, nope, I don't have that sense.
Good. Yeah.
But this is now in the past few years.
And that's part of ethical practice, isn't it? To know your limits and know when to refer to somebody else if it doesn't work for you. You're not going to work for that client.
Yeah, because, like, whiteness aside, there are psychologists or psychiatrists in Australia who, they would offer like diagnosis or assessments to perhaps the immigration for asylum seekers and things like that. And they might be of, they probably won't be of a Western background, because they will be able to speak and understand the culture. So they'll be of maybe some Middle Eastern background or something like that. And they might have the assumption that everyone who is not white, that is perhaps from Afghanistan or something like that, or Pakistan, might want something from them, a diagnosis or an assessment, and then just assume that they're there for paperwork rather than for actual help. And so they get dismissed. And then the moment you come across a mental health professional or even a doctor or something like that, and that's your first experience, chances of you going back for more help is a lot lesser. It's quite heartbreaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that reaching out is like a vulnerable thing, and to have to be knocked back or to be disappointed in the level of support, or even be like harmed by the help that you're seeking, would be pretty devastating and have repercussions. Like,
Yeah. And a few of my participants have actually expressed that the secular help that they sought ultimately was a negative experience. They're like, we're not doing that again.
Right, yeah.
Which is really sad, and that was regardless of what color the skin of their therapist was.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk to Amira now about her work as a trauma counsellor. So you working as a trauma counsellor with refugees in particular, is that right?
Yeah, I did used to do that. Yeah.
Okay. And what sort of experiences did refugees come to you with?
Good question. Big question. Lots of different things. A lot of PTSD, mainly.
So that was from their experiences before they fled to Australia?
Yeah. So some serious horror stories. Things I've never even watched in movies, really. I had to kind of imagine what was going on for them. So right now when you ask me this question, all I have in my mind are flashes of images of my imagination of what went on for them. And that's why I'm finding my words, because a picture paints 1,000 words. And if it's in your head, you have to really search for the words. But yeah, a lot of them were victims from war crimes. Some were held hostage. There was a lot of sexual assault, a lot of poverty, and half of them were not poor to begin with. Half of them have university degrees. Some were teachers. Some were doctors. And war just destroys everything, to the point where you're living in a refugee camp. And I remember someone telling me this. Her dad was shot in front of her, and he was a politician, and she was, I think, studying medicine or something like that in university, or literature, I can't remember anymore. And suddenly overnight she was searching for tomatoes on the streets with her tiny children, toddlers, as the only thing that they could find to eat, because they hadn't eaten in 3 days since all that started in her town. So yeah, those kind of stories. And wanting to also, trying to also assimilate and acculturate and integrate in Australia. It's exciting for them. They want to put a lot of things behind. They don't want to rehash some stuff, but things come up because, they're when you've gone through such traumatic experiences, especially with head injuries and gunshots and being exposed to all sorts of things that are beyond our imagination here in Australia, that will impact to some extent your cognitive capacities and abilities, to learn. So they have to learn English, they learn how to drive, how to take the public transport, what's legal, what's not legal. So we help them with the settlement and what's okay, what's not okay, and also talk to them and through some of their struggles here and trying to integrate. But mostly they're all very, very grateful, and most of them have, actually all my clients I interacted with back then had a really strong sense of spirituality and religion, and I think that really kept them sane.
Right, that's good. Did any of your clients have experiences of the refugee detention system in Australia?
Asylum seekers, from Sri Lanka. I didn't speak with them as much because when I started, some of the detention centers that would send their residents there into the Northern Territory had already shut down. So they were just pre-existing cases. Mainly the ones that I interacted with were from Syria and Sri Lanka.
I've heard people say that the temporary protection visa system is a secondary kind of detention for people. Did you have people that were having trouble with their visas as well?
No, not at the center I was working with, because the ones that came in, we could only service refugees with a refugee visa.
Yeah, right. Okay. So people who'd been genuinely found to be refugees by the Australian system.
Yeah, that came in by UNHCR. They were flown in, not the asylum seekers.
Well, it's good that they got their refugee status recognised. Yeah. But with the election coming up, it's good for people to hear, I think, that people who come to Australia and with such a hard time to get here as well, did some of them come here in very difficult circumstances?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the asylum seekers that I spoke with briefly, he was probably at the tail end of his therapeutic support at the point when I started working with him, and you could see visible scars and mutilation on his body. You could see from his mannerisms and his posture how he carried himself and what was weighing down on him, because they can't work. They really go through hell in this like limbo world that they're like, okay, I'm safe now, but hey, I could be here for forever, and in this situation I can't reunite with my family, but then I might go back. Maybe I should go back and just die. Some really, really dark thought patterns, but legitimate, I think, because that's their reality.
That's the visa system that does that, people. Yeah. Horrible. So I guess when you're working with people who have trauma, what do you think works best for them, for refugees who've experienced trauma? You've got their spirituality, and what about building trust with the community? Is that something that people struggle with?
Well, the refugee clients that come in, they don't have much of an issue with building trust with their own community, because sometimes they already know a lot of people there, and they get reunited with aunties and uncles and whatnot. So the community just embraces them. It's quite beautiful. And often I work with interpreters, and the interpreters would also be part of the community, so I have to be quite careful in terms of confidentiality and stuff. And the interpreters also know that. And we do a lot of community work. We throw parties all the time. All the time. The refugee center where we work was not like a workplace or an office in that sense. It becomes a bit of a party hall from time to time. And then we'll get everyone from the community to cook and provide food, dance, DJ, play music, drums, everything. And since the large portion of our clientele are from the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan, some from Syria as well, you can imagine the African beats going off and little kids. Like, I swear they probably learn how to dance before they walk, because the way they shake their body parts, even I can't do it. I tried to follow them. Like, what are you doing? I can't do it. So,
I love to hear that there's that fun stuff going on. It's celebration of life, because they've been through so much that they deserve that, don't they?
Yeah, they I think dance, music, church, those are the pillars of support for them, pillars of joy as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are really excited to learn.
That's beautiful.
So, Amira, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and your experiences with your research. We'd just like to finish up the show and ask you a few questions about your podcast. What's your podcast called?
My podcast is called Science of the Soul. So that's science as in SCIENCE, not street science. And it's actually my COVID baby. So it was birthed during lockdown, the first year, and I was bored and I wanted to do something different and challenge myself. I'm relatively technologically challenged, so it was just something different I wanted to do, basically. And I'm still doing it. I have a lot of fun. It's a fun project. I talk to people I've worked with, people that I meet, anyone who is in the mental health industry or has some significant inputs into mental health in general, from whatever angle, really. And I just talk to them and learn from them. So it's a bit of a learning platform for me as well. And that's what I want to share with whoever that would listen.
That's what I like about Only Human, is that I feel like I'm constantly learning from the people that we interview
Me
here.
too.
Yeah, it's great. So, what would you say has been your favourite episode so far, and what was the topic you covered?
Oh my God. I was not prepared for this question. You're going to have to give me a moment.
That's okay.
You're going to have to give me a moment, yes.
So if you are interested in, if you like the sound of Amira's voice, which sounds really good on the radio, I think.
Sure does.
You can go and find her podcast, Science of the Soul, on Spotify. And I think it's also Apple Podcasts. I had a little look for it earlier.
And Amira also has a YouTube channel, and we'll talk about maybe that in a minute.
Now I have the list of my episodes. They're more than 12. I stopped counting. The last one I did was on empowering cultural diversity and disability through education and social inclusion, and that was done with an ex-colleague, this wonderful woman, Isabel, and we talked about so many different things. We just digressed. That's the beauty of podcasts, right? You just digress. So that was really, really helpful. I learned a lot from her. She's in South Australia now. And the one before that, I think, was one of my favorites. It was it's on post-traumatic growth from post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's with an author and a therapist and a nutritionist. This woman, she's quite well rounded in terms of her knowledge, and she was she and I, we explored so many different areas of mental health and growth, even through spirituality as well. So I really enjoyed recording that with her. I've had so many, I kind of enjoy all of them, but there were a couple somewhere in there that was with a biblical counselor. I wanted to hear what his take was on some things. That went pretty philosophical, and previously, before that, I spoke with another ex-colleague who is a Buddhist practitioner of many, many years, decades, and we used to work together with refugee health, and he gave me a Buddhist insight into ego and love and other things. So yeah,
I think those podcasts you mentioned there kind of tie all of the topics together, don't they? Because you're talking about bereavement and how what it feels like for people and how spirituality helps them, and then there's that element of refugees having a terrible time but coming to a better place or improving their lives, and then there's that notion of that trauma is not always. Well, it's always bad when it happens to you, but afterwards, your life can be even better because you can grow through that.
Yeah.
That sounds beautiful. Yeah,
it is a recurring theme even in my studies, in my research, where so far 80% of what I've gone through, people reported personal growth. Yeah.
Yep. I guess the thing that we didn't ask you, although it's getting close to the end of our show now, is that what got you into this topic? Is it something personal?
Yeah,
to you?
yeah. So my mother passed away quite suddenly, and it took me 2 years to realize that it was traumatic grief, coming from a trauma counselor.
Yeah.
Talk about blind spots, man. And my whole world changed, and then I realized, and I started talking to people, that I wasn't the only one. So yeah.
That was the mother who had the chicken experience?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's so awful. I remember a couple of years ago my favourite cat died, and I worked with a couple of people who didn't like cats. I couldn't talk to them about it, and they were counsellors.
Oh, what?
Yeah, it was hard. It was very hard.
That's
well, I guess bereavement is different for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah. That's you've really enlightened us today. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your knowledge and your all of the things that are really important. And I think that's something that most people will go through various forms of bereavement and grief, and so we can all learn about how we, how we move through it and how we feel it, and yeah. Okay, well, we've
got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Perhaps I just want to ask you one more question about.
Sure.
I guess the Western world's got a bit of a bad rap in terms of not being prepared and denying that death is going to happen to us. We have this sense of youth and living forever. Do you think that is not working for us in terms of other cultures? Are other cultures more prepared for death than we are?
Yeah, I think that is true to an extent. I wasn't raised in a Western culture, so I've been going to funerals since I can remember. So there is a certain normalcy to that, and knowing that this will come. And with a lot of my participants that I speak to, they have also gone through the same thing, because with communal grieving, what happens is that everyone in town knows, it's announced, and you all come together, you do the congregational prayers, the wakes, like with the Hindus and the Buddhists do their wakes, and everyone comes throughout 7 days. Everyone knows this person has passed away and supports the family. And even the Irish, they would keep shaking hands and saying to the bereaved, I'm so sorry for your loss. And so it's really hard to not have that sink into you, not only cognitively, but, into your sense of being, even through a physical way. Because if someone's imagine 50 people come up to you and keep shaking your hand and saying, I'm sorry for your loss, that's going to be ingrained on a biological and physical level as well. So you can't be in denial for too long, if that makes sense. So and then the support, there's always a lot of support around you. Everyone knows how you're doing, this and that. They send this, they send that, they call. In Muslim cultures, you don't even worry about food, because there'll be 100 people at your house, but they're all bringing food, looking after everyone, you know. So
and is it still acceptable to continue to talk about that person after their death?
Yeah,
because I find that when people died in my life, that there's a certain number of weeks where it's acceptable, and then they don't. People don't expect you to talk about it anymore in Western culture.
Oh, really? Oh, I still talk about my mom almost daily, and she passed away 4 years ago.
You can talk about your mum to us, we don't mind.
I think that's something about shutting down the grief and not expressing the emotion, and that suppression, because you just have to get on with it, I guess.
Yeah, in fact, a relative of mine actually said that. Yeah. We just have to get on with it, It's so over now, we have to get on with it.
Well, you know what it is? People keep saying you have to move on, but really you need to move forward with it rather than leave it behind you. It's a part of you, and if you're grieving and you're sad about it, it affects you. You have to somehow integrate that loss or that life that you had with this person or this creature forward. It's not about discarding. It's about recreating yourself
and working through it too, isn't
it?
Any emotions that are denied and pushed down, they find a way out, don't they?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
That was good advice anyway, Amira. Thank you for that. It is nearly time for us to go, so we're going to go out with a song from who are we going out with, Nathan?
Have we got something?
Oh,
we might have
Belle.
to.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank
you for being on the show, Amira. And when you finish your PhD, definitely come back and talk to us about what you found.
I will.
That would be great.
It'll be in another year. But look, thank you guys so much for this opportunity. It's been really nice checking out for Triple Z and speaking with you guys about things that are close to my heart.
We
so thank you.
appreciate you coming in.